Hi guys, so I recently found this recipe for a fried tofu sandwich and this thing was amazing. It's a vegan sandwich which is crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside, and it has a really unique texture and flavor. The tofu in this sandwich get marinated in a pickle juice and chili paste marinade, giving the whole thing such a unique flavor. It does require a little bit of time, but honestly the process is very simple, and the eggless batter that is used to coat the tofu I thought was pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to end up cooking this tofu twice. Once in the pan to give some browning to the surface of the tofu right before you marinate it, and the second time is when we deep fry it. So first things first, let's start by making our marinade, which turns out to be really simple and really is only made from 4 ingredients. We need about a tablespoon of Dijon mustard, a tablespoon of a pepper paste component, so I'm using some Korean gochujang because I have this, but sambal or even some sriracha would work here. Side note, this stuff is a really good investment if you're looking for some ingredient to kind of be a hero and spice up regular dishes. It's a very complex and spicy flavor, and it just goes with everything. It's great. So next, we want to add a few shakes of Tabasco sauce or any other hot sauce, honestly. And lastly, we need about 1.5 cups of pickle juice, preferably from some dill pickles. Now give this a mix, and at first it will resist coming together, but eventually it will, and it'll eventually look like this. Now, for sure, this is not the most appetizing looking marinade, but it was really tasty, and it'll give our tofu a spicy, salty, acidic flavor, which I really enjoyed. All right, so once our marinade is mixed together, we can go ahead and set it off to the side while we begin working on our tofu. Now, I'm using a block of extra firm tofu here, so we're just gonna drain it and let it dry for a little bit on some paper towels. If you have a tofu press and you want to extract more liquid from this block, it wouldn't be a bad idea. It makes it easier for our tofu to sponge up more of the marinade later. But I didn't do this and it still turned out pretty good. All right, so now we need to cut the tofu block up in such a way that it creates an equal number of even blocks. Ideally ones that would fit nicely onto a bun. Now as far as thickness, I would say about 1 centimeter or about 1/2 inch of a thickness is ideal. However, if you need to go a little bit thinner or thicker to break up the block into even components, it won't break the recipe. Now the block I used was kind of weirdly shaped, so I went with kind of more oblong, longer blocks, but it actually worked out pretty well. I was able to get 4 blocks out of 1 big block, and now it wouldn't be a bad idea to, again, dry the surface of the tofu. We're gonna brown these blocks of tofu, and wet blocks won't brown very well. So I'm just using some paper towels to help absorb some of the water from the surface. So speaking of browning, it's actually time to get a pan ready. So heat a pan up over medium heat and add in some neutral oil. I'm using vegetable oil here. Once the pan is up to heat, carefully add the tofu block, and if it's bubbling like this, it's a pretty good sign. Now your first instinct may be to kind of flip this, but we really want a nice brown crust on this. So let it sit for a few minutes. And for the level of browning that I got on my tofu, I just really let it sit for about 3 minutes. Once the 3 minutes are up, it's time to flip. Now you gotta be a little careful here because the tofu block has a tendency to stick to the pan, especially if you're using stainless steel like I am. So when I tried to flip the block, I got a spatula and I partially angled it towards the actual pan so that I'm less likely to actually cut into the tofu, and then I just really am making sure that I'm scraping the tofu off of the pan. Once you do that, just go ahead and flip it over, and we're gonna let the other side brown like we did for the first side. So just let it sit for 3 minutes. So once we're done, again, carefully remove the tofu block and place it directly into our marinade. We're gonna repeat this process for all 4 blocks. And if you have room for it, feel free to do 2 at a time. So once we have all 4 blocks in our marinade, place this into a fridge for a minimum of 2 hours or up to a whole day. I marinated mine for about 4 hours. So once we're done marinating, it's time to fry the tofu blocks. We're gonna double batter our tofu blocks. And usually when you batter something, you usually have a wet component and a dry component. Typically in most fried recipes, the wet component's either made with milk or eggs or a combination of both. But since this is a vegan recipe, we won't be using eggs or milk, but rather 1/2 cup of Dijon mustard and about 3 to 4 tablespoons of water. What you wanna do is just whisk this up until it comes to a consistency like this. Oh, sorry also that the lens is a little bit out of focus. So once we have our wet part of our batter, it's time to make the dry. And for the dry ingredients, we need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and a bunch of spices. You do have some latitude in what you use here, but I'm gonna use about a teaspoon of the following: paprika, chipotle, onion powder, garlic powder, and freshly ground black pepper. Whisk this all up and boom, we're ready to fry these puppies. So to fry the tofu, I'm using an enameled Dutch oven, which I'm filling with a few inches of vegetable oil. Put the burner on medium heat and let's wait until the oil comes up to about 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 176 degrees Celsius. While this heats up, let me show you how to actually batter the tofu for frying. Now ideally, you want to wait until the oil is almost ready before starting the battering process so that you can just directly toss the tofu into the oil after it's been battered. So to batter, we want to take a block of tofu and coat it in the wet mixture, making sure to get all the nooks and crannies. And we want to let the excess drip off, and then we're going to toss it into the dry mixture and coat it with flour. Now Chef John recommends using one hand for wet and one hand for dry, but unfortunately I needed a clean hand to operate the camera, so I ended up also battering my fingers in the process. Once we're done with the flour, it's time to get back and coat it again with the wet mixture. By doing a double coat of batter, we'll end up with something nice and crispy, almost like what you'd see, for example, in like a chicken sandwich or something like that with those little ridges. It's really an awesome touch. So double battering is the way to go. So once we're done coating the tofu with our batter, it's time to actually put it into the oil, which is hopefully up to temperature at this point. We're going to carefully place this into the oil and let it fry for about 3 minutes or so. Then we're going to give it a flip. Once it's cooked on both sides, it's time to actually pull it out and put it on some paper towels. This will help soak up any excess oil that's on the surface of the tofu. We're just going to repeat this process for all 4 blocks. Now again, if you have space in your pot, feel free to do multiple at a time. Just keep in mind that you don't want to add too much at the same time. It can drop the temperature of the oil and then it won't really fry properly. Okay, so now that everything's fried, we're ready for final assembly. So I'm going to put mine on a toasted bun with some vegan mayonnaise, some cabbage, some hot sauce, and then just put our delicious warm tofu and pickles. Just put this together and that's it. Now this was an amazing sandwich. It had such a unique flavor, something unlike anything I've had before. I know it's a little bit of work, but honestly this was a super amazing sandwich. All right, thanks guys for watching. For a detailed recipe online, be sure to check out my newly made website, flavorlab.xyz. If you did enjoy this, consider watching one of my other videos, such as the Science of Bread video, hint hint, nudge nudge, or giving this channel a sub. It really helps me out. Okay, thanks guys, bye.